Well, joining me now, the writer and Labour strategist Alastair Campbell, who was head of communications for Tony Blair, of course, and the Conservative political activist and columnist Tim Montgomerie. Tim Montgomerie, Tyrone Ming's tweet, accusation against Priti Patel, still stands today. It hasn't really been answered. Does the party have to admit that all those politicians who opposed this very clear act of anti-racism got it massively wrong?
Well, I think it's for others to judge whether they got it wrong in terms of tactics and political support. But I think the charge of racism towards Priti Patel, someone who's been the victim of terrible racism herself and is working with social media organizations this very day to improve their procedures to identify people who are guilty of racist hate. That's I think, unfair. The reason why she took the stance that she did, the reason why other Conservative MPs objected to the taking of the knee as a symbol, was that it was associated with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. The Black Lives Matter movement isn't just a movement about racial equality. It has an agenda against the police, calling for defunding the police, is opposed to the nuclear family, takes a strident position on capitalism.
Yeah. But it's also associated with being knighted by the Queen. You know, it doesn't matter, does it, what else it's associated with?
No,
the England team were very clear about what it meant.
Yes, but I think other people who also complained about the gesture, or however you would want to describe it, were also clear why they objected to it. They weren't in any way against the commitment to racial equality. And I was a season ticket holder at Old Trafford for 10 years. We regularly had kick out racism campaigns. I remember, holding the banner afloat in the crowd as it went round. No one objected to that. The reason why I and other Conservatives objected to the taking the knee was because of its closeness to a Black Lives Matter movement that actually, I think, a lot of other Conservatives think has set back the cause of racial justice, not advanced it.
Alastair Campbell, is this a culture war that's blowing up in the government's face?
Well, I hope so, because I think that the culture war that they're deliberately provoking on so many fronts is for them a substitute for what a government ought to be doing, which is try to govern in the best interests of the people of the country. You've got a unit in Downing Street headed by a married couple, Doug Smith and Munira Mirza. They exist to provoke these culture wars. And I think what happened here is that they completely misjudged the mood. Don't forget, Priti Patel went out on GB News, which I think was part of the culture war as well, very deliberately to say that she opposed this gesture. And what I think the footballers really, really resent, one, is not being taken at face value. They are doing this because they have seen the black guys are subject to racism and their white teammates have seen what it's like, and they're all sick to death of it, and they're making a statement. And then the second thing that I think has got on their nerves, as the government actually is continuing part of the culture wars, trying to ally themselves, once it was obvious England were doing rather well, trying to ally themselves, jump on the bandwagon, and Johnson dressing up in his shirt and hanging out the flags. It's all part of the same thing. And I think what you saw with Tyrone Mings was him very eloquently expressing what a lot of people in football think, which is they're not taken seriously. And this thing about racism, I hear what Tim says about, the kick it out campaigns, but the fact is that those campaigns, there's still a need for them because there still remains an awful lot of racism. And what you have in Priti Patel, I think it's ridiculous to say that she's racist, given that I agree with Tim, that she probably is subject to herself. She is subject to herself to an awful lot of appalling racism, but what she is capable of doing, and does the whole time, is dog whistle politics, trying to divide people rather than bring together, trying to provoke anger rather than a sense of unity in the country. And that was what her statement about taking the knee was all about. And she's being hit back now, and I hope that the players continue to do that, because they do have a voice, they do have a platform, and they're actually popular and good at their job, unlike the government.
Tim Montgomerie, isn't there something that unites all of these things, though, whether it's cutting foreign aid, which I know you're appalled by, or opposing anti-racism, or sort of doing what the unlockers in your party want to happen over COVID rules, that is sort of part of an allied culture war that is about trying to appeal to popular sentiment?
I don't know. I think the truth is that probably the Conservative Party in Britain, Conservative parties around the world, feel like they're on the back foot in a lot of the cultural wars. I think, a lot of the cultures in universities, a lot of the culture in courtrooms, a lot of the cultures in media are increasingly alien to the Conservative Party. It's that sort of famous march through the institutions that cultural Marxists have talked about. So the Conservative Party, like many Conservative parties around the world, is hitting back. It may not be hitting back as intelligently as I would like it to at the moment, but I think it would be wrong to say that the Conservative Party is starting and stoking culture wars. I think it's actually completely the reverse. I think there is a large number of people in Britain, and it's a large number of working class Labour voters who certainly feel alienated from their sort of current metropolitan leadership elites, who feel that their values, their love of their country, always being told that their country is racist when they don't believe that it is, when they're told that they can't work, they can't sort of generally celebrate the nation, full stop. That's what the Conservative Party is responding to. I don't think it's got the tone right at all. You're right, Krishnan. I'm embarrassed about the aid cut today. There's something that is increasingly nativist about the current Conservative leadership. I don't like that. But it's wrong to say that the Conservative Party is actually stoking these wars. Quite the opposite.
Alastair Campbell, I mean, as Tim Montgomerie says, I mean, isn't the problem that Labour has also failed to be sure-footed on this and to find a position on these matters of culture, whether it's racism or anything else, around which the country can unite? It's still dividing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look, I really do have to respond to what Tim said there. You mentioned some of these situations, for example, on university campuses and so forth. They're taking problems that are fairly small scale. When you set them against child poverty, when you set them against the fact that Brexit is going so badly wrong, not least in Northern Ireland, when you set them against issues like, and I agree with Tim about the overseas aid thing, the challenges of poverty around the world, they're picking on these minuscule battles which they are deliberately provoking. They do have a unit in Downing Street that's doing this. They do want this to replace a sort of proper strategy for the country. And yes, I think Labour's maybe, not necessarily getting the tone right, but that's, I think, because they're not challenging this nonsense nearly hard enough. I was glad, actually, to see that Labour has come out very strongly in relation to what's happened in the last couple of days. But the fact is, it's almost like we're debating myths the whole time. The country is facing massive problems, massive challenges. And it suits the government if we can be talking about flags and symbols and all this sort of nonsense that they want us to talk about. So what I say to Labour, it's actually about getting a proper strategy, proper policies that meet those needs, and just blow this stuff away, because it's utter nonsense. And it's driven, I think, partly by a lot of it driven by the media, a lot of it driven by the right wing of the Conservative Party, I think, because they do not have a strategy for the country. Their big project, Brexit, is going wrong. They've not handled COVID very well. Schools aren't in the shape they should be. Hospitals aren't in the shape that they should be. Crime's not in the shape that it should be in terms of how the government deals with it. So they prefer us to be talking about this nonsense. And I honestly believe what we're seeing is what happens when you elect as Prime Minister somebody who is amoral, somebody who doesn't really know what he wants to be in politics for, and meanwhile he appoints a cabinet of absolute numpties, most of whom wouldn't have got a job carrying Margaret Thatcher's bag.
I'm sure we could come back and debate this all night, but Alastair Campbell, Tim Montgomerie, thank you very much indeed.